It is a moonless night in the Bay of Biscay, 1942. A German Type 7 U-boat surfaces, its diesel engines roaring to life to recharge. The commander checks the METOX receiver. The screen is a steady, comforting green. No radar detected. He orders full power, believing the darkness is his sanctuary. He doesn't know it yet, but the sky above is listening on a frequency his equipment was never built to understand. In 1942, the U-boat fleet was winning. During the second happy time, German submarines sank merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Churchill later admitted the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him. The strategy was simple: surface at night, strike the convoy, and dive before dawn. The Allies countered with ASV Mark II radar, but it operated on a wavelength of 5 feet, a signal the German METOX could detect from miles away. It was a stalemate of cat and mouse until a palm-sized piece of copper weighing less than 2 pounds entered the fray. This tiny disc possessed no explosives, yet it was about to render Hitler's multi-million-dollar submarine fleet obsolete almost overnight. For decades, the image of a U-boat's destruction was synonymous with the depth charge. The Mark VII, a steel drum packed with 420 pounds of high explosives, was the Allied primary answer to the submarine threat. It was designed to be a blunt instrument of terror, dropped in patterns to crush a hull through sheer hydraulic pressure. But the terrifying reality for Allied sailors was that this brutal weapon was statistically a failure. In the vast, lonely stretches of the North Atlantic, the ocean's massive volume acted as a natural shock absorber for Hitler's fleet, swallowing the energy of thousands of explosions. Because water is non-compressible, it acts as a nearly impenetrable shield for anything not in the immediate blast zone. To actually rupture the pressure hull of a German submarine, a Mark VII had to detonate within a precise, razor-thin margin of 25 feet. If the pilot or sonar operator was off by just a few seconds, and the bomb exploded 50 or 60 feet away, the U-boat would merely suffer some broken light bulbs and a terrifying shake before slipping away. It was like trying to swat a fly in a pitch-black room with a massive sledgehammer. You make a deafening noise and shatter the floorboards, but the fly simply buzzes off into the corners, untouched, alert, and ready to strike back at the next defenseless tanker. By 1942, German commanders knew the math was on their side. Once a U-boat descended past the 300-foot mark, it entered a sanctuary where the blind flailing of surface ships rarely reached. Allied escort groups would often expend hundreds of these 420-pound cylinders in a single engagement, churning the ocean into a frothy mess of white water, only to have the U-boat reappear miles away to sink another merchant ship. The depth charge was a weapon of psychological theater, providing a loud, violent illusion of security, while the Grey Wolves continued their slaughter almost undisturbed, proving that raw power without precision is just expensive noise in a vast, uncaring sea. The METOX shield. The Allies knew they couldn't rely on blind luck. They needed eyes in the dark. This led to the deployment of the ASV Mark II radar, a massive technological leap that operated on a wavelength of 5 feet. On paper, this gave British aircraft the ability to spot a surfaced U-boat from miles away in total darkness. It was supposed to be the end of the German advantage, but the laws of physics provided the Germans with a counter-move that was as simple as it was effective. They realized that sending out a radar pulse was like shining a powerful flashlight in a dark forest. Everyone can see your beam coming long before you see them. German engineers developed the METOX FB1, a passive radar warning receiver. Because the METOX only had to listen for signals rather than bounce them back, it could detect the Allied radar pulses from a staggering 30 miles away, long before the radar itself could see the submarine. This created a deadly technological paradox. The more radar-equipped planes the Allies sent into the sky, the safer the U-boats became. As the German crews were given a constant long-range broadcast of exactly where their hunters were located, effectively turning the unsuspecting predator into the vulnerable prey. Whenever the METOX began to chirp, the U-boat commander had a luxury of time, usually a full 30-minute window, to clear the decks and perform a controlled dive. By the time the Allied pilot reached the coordinates, the ocean surface was empty and calm. During the second happy time, this electronic shield allowed the Germans to sink over 500 Allied ships in just 6 months. The Allies were broadcasting their presence to the entire Atlantic, and for a period in 1942, the eyes in the dark were actually guiding the wolves to safety, rendering millions of dollars of British technology worse than useless in the face of German ingenuity. As the Atlantic turned into a graveyard for Allied shipping, the solution didn't come from a bigger bomb, but from a small, high-security laboratory at the University of Birmingham. In early 1940, physicists John Randall and Harry Boot created a device that defied the conventional limits of electronic warfare. It was a solid, palm-sized block of high-purity copper, precisely 3 inches in diameter, yet its internal architecture was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. This wasn't just a radio component, it was the birth of the cavity magnetron. American officials later described this 2-pound disc as the most valuable cargo ever brought to their shores, the singular invention that shifted the tides of global conflict. To ensure its safety, the prototype was carried across the Atlantic in a simple, unpretentious wooden box, a humble exterior for a machine of war. The choice of copper was purely functional, yet poetic. Its extreme thermal and electrical conductivity allowed the device to handle massive, concentrated bursts of power without melting into a useless puddle of slag. Inside this block, engineers had machined 6 perfectly circular resonant cavities, small holes that acted like the chambers of an electronic whistle. As electrons whirled past these openings at nearly the speed of light, they created an electromagnetic resonance that pumped out massive amounts of energy. This process converted raw electricity into high-frequency microwaves with a wavelength of just 10 centimeters, or roughly 4 inches. This was a monumental leap. Prior to this, the Allies were struggling with bulky, fragile vacuum tubes that could barely produce 10 watts of power. The magnetron, by contrast, blasted out 10,000 watts, a signal so violent it could cut through the thickest Atlantic fog like a physical blade. This shift in wavelength changed everything on the battlefield. Unlike the old 5-foot signals that splashed across the sky like a leaky garden hose, these 4-inch waves acted like a surgical scalpel. A 10-centimeter radar beam was so sharp and so concentrated that it could detect a U-boat's snorkel, a tiny metal pipe only 3 feet tall, even when it was hidden among chaotic, crashing waves over 10 feet high. The Copper Heart gave the Allies the ability to see through the ocean's camouflage with a level of detail that the German Kriegsmarine believed was physically impossible. By miniaturizing the magnetron, the Allies could now fit a powerful radar into the cramped nose of a long-range bomber, effectively stripping the Grey Wolves of their only true weapon, their absolute invisibility in the dark. By early 1943, the Copper Heart was hidden inside the nose of British B-24 Liberators, and the results were devastatingly swift. This new radar, the ASV Mark III, operated on the 4-inch wavelength that the German Metox receivers were completely deaf to. For the U-boat crews, the silence of their warning equipment was their death warrant. They would sit on the surface in total confidence, unaware that a silent predator was tracking their heat and steel from over 10 miles away in the pitch-black sky. The hunter was invisible. The prey was blind. The end was inevitable. The kill chain was a masterpiece of synchronized technology. As the aircraft approached the submarine's coordinates, the pilot would cut the engines to a low hum, gliding through the darkness. When the plane reached a distance of exactly 1,500 yards, a massive searchlight known as the Lee Light would suddenly erupt with 22 million candle power. 1 second, the German watchmen were staring into a peaceful black void. The next, they were blinded by a light brighter than the midday sun, illuminating every rivet on their conning tower, as if they were under a laboratory microscope. In this moment of blinding shock, the cold reality of physics turned against the Kriegsmarine. A standard Type 7 U-boat required approximately 30 seconds to perform a desperate crash dive to a safe depth. However, a Liberator flying at an attack speed of roughly 160 miles per hour needed only 15 seconds to close the remaining distance and straddle the hull with a lethal spread of depth charges. The math of survival had been cut in half, leaving the Germans with a 15-second deficit that they could only fill with rushing seawater and fire. From the moment that 22 million candle power beam hit the water, the U-boat was no longer a warship. It was a steel coffin, and the copper disc had already signed the final order. The Black May. By May 1943, the cumulative effect of the copper disc reached a horrific crescendo. In a single devastating month, the Allies destroyed 43 U-boats. This was an unsustainable loss. Nearly 25% of the operational fleet wiped out in 30 days. This period, forever etched into history as Black May, signaled the total collapse of the Wolfpack strategy. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was paralyzed. His veteran crews were being massacred by an invisible hand. The predators were now the prey. The Atlantic was no longer a hunting ground, it was a graveyard. On May 24, 1943, he issued the fateful order to withdraw. The Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. The tragedy for the Kriegsmarine lay in their fundamental failure of adaptation. German scientists spent over a year chasing ghosts. They were convinced the British used infrared sensors or that their own METOX receivers were leaking signals. They couldn't imagine a piece of copper capable of speaking a language their equipment was never built to understand. By the time a captured Rotterdam device revealed the truth, it was too late. The German High Command lost the war not because they lacked courage or steel, but because they lost the race for the electromagnetic spectrum. The legacy of the cavity magnetron extends far beyond the rusted hulls of submarines. After the war, engineer Percy Spencer noticed microwaves from a radar set could melt a candy bar in his pocket. This accidental discovery transformed a weapon of mass destruction into a household essential. Today, that same copper heart sits inside your kitchen, powering the microwave that heats your meals every single day. It serves as a permanent reminder that the ultimate victor is rarely the one with the biggest bomb. It wasn't the thousands of tons of steel or TNT. It was this small copper heart that truly won the Atlantic. In war, the side that adapts to the frequency of change the fastest is the only one that survives. If you found this dive into hidden history fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe to join us as we uncover more lost secrets of World War II. What other small invention do you think changed history? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.